people talk more eloquently about things of volume and some specific examples here. But yeah, there'll be time for kind of questions and discussion at the end. So I'm going to hand over first to Merilyn. We'll talk about anti-Nazi, well, German, anti-Nazi resistance and things. But other things I think she's talking about. But thank you.
Can you all hear me if I stay seated? Yeah. Yeah? Okay, I mean, this doesn't quite fit into the model that Christian described, but we'll see. And I want to start by asking why the resistance from within the German working class movement after Hitler became Chancellor has been all but forgotten. We know about the plot of 20th of July 1944 against Hitler, which was led by a few disgruntled members of the armed forces who were fearful that Hitler was leading Germany to defeat and hoping for an alliance with the West against the USSR. And we know about the White Rose group, who were largely well-meaning students. But what is largely ignored is that working class areas of many large cities before 1933 were in a state of near civil war between the Red Front, which was associated with the KPD, the Communist Party, and other anti-Nazi groupings, with the SA or the Freikorps from 1933 onwards, and that hundreds of thousands, mostly KPD, were arrested and worse for their anti-Nazi political activities. In just March and April, immediately after the Reichstag fire, in February 1933, the SA and the police, you'll notice the police crop up quite a lot, the SA and the police arrested 40 to 50,000 political opponents. That's in 2 months after the Reichstag fire. Lafitte, an ex-CPer in Britain, writing in 1940, stated that the Gestapo calculated, so, one may not trust their figures, but they calculated in 1939 alone there were over 400,000 political prisoners. I hate to think what happened to most of them. By 1945, about 30,000 members of the Communist Party, of the KPD, have been executed. Why has this opposition largely been ignored? The emphasis placed on the Holocaust has overshadowed that the Nazis' first victims were almost all political. Indeed, my argument is that the Nazis pre-1933 were primarily concerned with the destruction of the organized working class. Later, the Cold War excluded sympathy for working class anti-Nazis in West Germany, and even in the 1980s, there was significant opposition to communists being included in the Resistance Museum that was in West Berlin. Nor did East Germany always welcome the memory of the resistance, many of whom had not abided by the party line. And because of how hidden the resistance was and how many of them were killed, there were and are few inherited memories. So, the KPD was in the leadership of the resistance, though this was more to do with its membership and sympathizers than its leadership. Firstly, the leadership line was a disaster. It saw the Nazis gaining power as a short-term interlude before a successful communist offensive. They did not understand they had been defeated, and there's that famous quote, "After them," that's the Nazis, "after them us." And until 1935-36, it continued to see members of the Social Democratic Party as class traitors, or to use their terms, social fascists. I do understand, don't all shout at me, I do understand the KPD's ultra-left line towards the SPD. It was the SPD leadership which had caused the murder of Luxemburg and Liebknecht and the deaths of those supporting the May Day rally in 1929. The SPD's priority, that's the Social Democrats, was the maintenance of a stable parliamentary republic, to the point where they voted for Hindenburg for president, and not for the KPD tailman in the 1932 presidential elections. Hindenburg's the person who made himself famous by appointing Hitler. Indeed, they saw the communists as their main enemy. The best of the SPD left to form the Socialist Workers' Party, who, unlike this SPD, supported an anti-Nazi united front. There were two stages to the German resistance, up till 34-35, when it was basically crushed. And the first stage was still rooted in local activity, which could be just keeping a cell intact, and members alive, and a minimal amount of leafleting and graffitiing. Although estimates vary, most activists have been picked up and imprisoned by 1935. Dachau, the first camp designed specifically for KPD prisoners, took 5,000 political prisoners within days of the Reichstag fire. Hundreds lost their lives there, just in 1933. In 1936, about 3,700 of the 4,700 concentration camp inmates were political prisoners. In 1938, there was another sweep of communists. At this point, political prisoners still formed the majority of all camp inmates. I'm going to quickly go into detail on one clandestine group during this first period. Gebauer, a member of the KPD, and his comrades who were based around Dresden. I choose it partly because of how early it organized. They organized an anti-Nazi protest within days of Hitler becoming Chancellor on the 7th of February, before the Reichstag fire, and against the Communist Party official line. Hundreds were arrested, 9 anti-Nazis were killed, and many more seriously injured at an anti-fascist meeting supported by 600 to 800, odd number, called by the local KPD on January 25th, 26th, when a local policeman opened fire. A United Front demonstration of over 30,000 came to the funeral, including numerous Social Democratic workers, despite the ban by the SPD executive. Before the March 5th elections, the red flag was attached to a number of local factory chimneys, and Vote KPD written on the chimneys of the glass factory in Pirna. Its location near Czechoslovakia meant it then became involved in frontier swaps of people and material. Apparently the Red Front members, an illegal defense group set up originally by the KPD back in 1924, were invaluable because of their experience at working conspiratorially underground. They transported a press and colouring ink at night and hid it under rocks in a quarry at, believe it or not, it's called Satan's Kopf. There they printed leaflets calling for a fight against fascism. The Red Front members also provided some weapons, which they had hidden in a field where they could go to pick mushrooms near the Czech borders. Couriers were expected to carry small arms. The mountaineers got wanted people out of Germany and brought illegal literature in, which they hid in a mountain cave, which also held a duplicator. But in late 1933, a group of mushroom pickers were arrested by the Gestapo. In July 1933, Gebauer was arrested, but was released a year later. Could you get this? Thank you. Was arrested but was released a year later. He then set up another resistance group, which included communists, social democrats, the Socialist Workers' Youth, the Red Front, non-party anti-fascists, organized into groups of 3 or 4. Significantly, they campaigned around unemployment and the economy. They also hid wanted people, procured false papers, supported the families of arrested comrades, of exiles in Czechoslovakia, as well as supporting comrades fighting in the Spanish Civil War. In 1935, 3 of the best frontier comrades were shot. In 1938, Gebauer was arrested and murdered at the police headquarters in Dresden. The second phase, which placed greater emphasis on democracy rather than socialism, essentially began after the outbreak of war, but more so after the end of the Hitler-Stalin Pact, and can be dated from late 1941. To give one example, Ulrich, a member of the KPD, held together an almost entirely working class group. Active and arrested in the first period, upon release, he set up a group which had members in different Berlin weapons and armaments works. Amazing. Especially Siemens. Armaments production obviously was crucial. The priority of the Ulrich network was to organize sabotage and go-slows in factories, contributing to Germany's war effort. From 40 to 45, Bürgerwerke employed more than 50,000 forced civilian laborers, prisoners of war, and concentration camp inmates. Herbert Grasser, together with Eugene Neuthardt, who had been an official of the Red Front, sought to recruit foreign forced laborers for joint sabotage campaigns against war production. Rearrested on October the 23rd, 1942, Grasser committed suicide on the way to his interrogation. God. The trouble with this stuff is it's so upsetting. In the Berlin police headquarters the next day. The Ulrich network built cells in about 90 Berlin factories. Extraordinary. Herbert Grass ran a small print shop which produced leaflets which were distributed to the factories, particularly by local KPD youth. One leaflet read, "Unite, write on the walls, whisper to your friends, for peace, freedom and bread. Down with the warmongers, down with Hitler." They also amazingly published an underground paper, analyzing the military situation and calling for sabotage and go-slows. In 1941, the Gestapo infiltrated the Ulrich group, and in February 1942, Ulrich and 200 other members were arrested. Ulrich was sent to Sachsenhausen camp and guillotined, as were most of the others. How far there was resistance organized by workers in their workplaces is contested, and depends to a significant degree by what is meant by resistance. There is no time for this, but Mason argues that many industrial disputes up to 1939, although apparently economic, actually can be stood as also anti-Nazi. Once war began, even going slow was punishable by being sent to a camp with death as the likely outcome. Certainly there is some evidence that amongst the millions of forced and slave laborers, there was a greater likelihood of soft industrial action than amongst native Germans from 1940 onwards. The best known example of armed sabotage by left resistance groupings was by the Baum group, who tried and failed to blow up the anti-Soviet propaganda exhibition, The Soviet Paradise. That was the Nazis being ironic. In 1942, leading to terrible revenge killings of these traitors, which is what they were called, by the SS. The Baum group's politics are still much contested. Many of their members were Jewish, as well as being KPD, and it is used mistakenly, as I see it, to reveal a specific and organized Jewish resistance in Germany. Again and again, it was young people who were the leading anti-Nazi activists. When you read this stuff, it's just breathtaking. The so-called Edelweiss Pirates were a loose, largely young working-class grouping, based largely in Cologne, who have received little publicity and they're often not favorable, and who got into regular bundles, sometimes deadly, with Nazi youth. The Gestapo hated them. In November 1944, 13 leading members were publicly hanged and others sent to camps. A last word about the resistance. In the last years of the war, the emphasis, for example, by the mixed class resistance Kreisau Circle, led by von Moltke, that gives you a clue, shifted increasingly towards preparing for the Allies. The Kreisau Circle had links with the National Committee for a Free Germany, originally established in the USSR by German refugees and largely under Comintern control. Their concern was to plan for a post-Nazi social democratic, not socialist Germany. But one of the KPD members, Ernst Rambo, was a Gestapo agent. The Circle were arrested and killed on the 20th of November 1944. As German defeat loomed, and especially after the unsuccessful attempt on Hitler's life in July 1944, Nazi paranoia increased. The SS commandos gained an unfettered dominance in the camps and intensified their policy of extermination against Jews and political opponents, shooting political prisoners and resistance fighters in their unachievable final attempt to rid the world of Bolshevism. Thank you.